Sometimes the smallest rejection reveals the biggest truth about a person. Marcus Reed heard those words years ago from his grandmother, and on a gray Tuesday morning in downtown Chicago, he was about to understand exactly what they meant. The conference center overlooked Lake Michigan, 40 floors above the city streets, where glass towers reflected the pale autumn sunlight and traffic crawled below like streams of red and white lights. Marcus adjusted the sleeve of his worn navy work jacket as he stepped through the revolving doors. He wasn't dressed like the executives gathering inside. He wasn't supposed to be. He was there as a community representative, invited because he had spent years helping local families navigate housing issues in neighborhoods most wealthy people only drove past with their windows closed. At 42, Marcus carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had learned that dignity didn't come from titles. It came from keeping promises. Especially the promises made to a child waiting at home. Around him, conversations floated through the lobby. Expensive suits. Designer handbags. Perfect smiles. The language of influence and money. Marcus paid little attention. His focus remained on the notes, folded carefully inside his jacket pocket. Ideas. Concerns. Solutions. Things he hoped someone in that building might actually listen to. Then the room shifted. People straightened their posture. Conversations softened. Heads turned toward the entrance. Charlotte Whitmore had arrived. The CEO of Whitmore Urban Development moved through the lobby with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to attention. At 35, she had built a reputation as one of the most influential business leaders in the Midwest. Elegant. Brilliant. Unreachable. Her charcoal gray suit looked tailored to perfection. Her blonde hair was pulled neatly behind her shoulders. Her phone vibrated twice before she silenced it without even glancing down. Marcus watched her approach the gathering group. One by one, people greeted her. Handshakes. Smiles. Polite laughter. Then she reached him. Marcus offered a warm smile and extended his hand. "Marcus Reed," he said. "Pleasure to meet you." For a moment, time seemed to pause. Charlotte's eyes flickered toward his hand. Then toward his face. She gave a short nod. Nothing more. No handshake. No apology. No acknowledgement beyond the brief gesture before moving past him toward the executives waiting behind. The rejection lasted less than 2 seconds. Most people probably wouldn't have noticed. But Marcus noticed. So did several others standing nearby. An uncomfortable silence lingered in the air before conversations resumed. Marcus lowered his hand calmly. No anger crossed his face. No embarrassment. He simply slipped both hands into his jacket pockets and stepped aside. Across the room, Charlotte continued greeting guests without looking back. Yet something about the interaction remained suspended between them. A tiny moment. Easy to dismiss. Easy to forget. Except Marcus had spent his life understanding that small moments often revealed the things people worked hardest to hide. And somewhere deep inside Charlotte Whitmore's carefully controlled world, a story was already beginning to unfold. Marcus found a seat near the back of the conference room. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Chicago skyline, while rows of polished tables stretched beneath soft recessed lighting. Around him, executives reviewed presentations, consultants compared notes, and assistants hurried between seats carrying tablets and coffee cups. The room felt carefully designed to impress people. Marcus had spent enough years attending public meetings to know that impressive rooms did not always produce meaningful conversations. He slipped his folded notes onto the table and quietly waited. Across the room, Charlotte Whitmore sat at the head of the main table surrounded by senior leadership. Her attention remained fixed on a series of financial reports displayed on a large screen. She rarely looked up. Her world moved fast. Faster than most people could follow. Faster than most people dared interrupt. The meeting officially began at 9 o'clock. Introductions were brief. Statistics followed. Housing projections. Development plans. Revenue forecasts. Charts filled the screen one after another. Marcus listened carefully. He had learned long ago that the most important details were often hidden beneath the most impressive presentations. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. The conversation grew increasingly technical. Numbers. Percentages. Expansion targets. Yet one thing continued bothering him. He noticed it in the third presentation. Then again in the fourth. Entire neighborhoods appeared on development maps, but the people who actually lived there seemed almost invisible. The discussion focused on buildings. Very little focused on families. Marcus made a small note in the margin of his paper. Across the table, Charlotte continued leading the discussion with calm authority. Her voice was precise, efficient, controlled. The kind of voice people rarely challenged. Then a soft vibration interrupted the room's rhythm. Marcus glanced down. His phone lit up. Emma. His daughter. For a moment he considered silencing the call. But Emma never called during school hours unless something mattered. He quietly stepped into a hallway before answering. Hey, Peanut. Her small voice arrived immediately. Dad, I am sorry. Marcus smiled. For what? I do not think I can do the presentation today. He leaned against the wall beside a large window overlooking the lake. What happened? Everybody else sounds smarter than me. The words came out fast. Nervous. Familiar. Marcus closed his eyes for a second. He recognized that fear. He had carried it himself many times. Emma. Yeah? Do you remember what we talked about last week? A pause. Maybe. Being brave does not mean feeling confident. Another pause. It does not. No. Being brave means doing the right thing even when your knees feel shaky. A small laugh escaped her. My knees actually feel shaky. Mine too sometimes. Silence. Then another laugh. Stronger this time. You are joking. Not at all. Every important thing I have ever done started with shaky knees. He heard her breathing settle. What if I mess up? She asked quietly. Marcus looked out at the water sparkling beyond the city buildings. Then you learn. And next time you do a little better. That is how everybody grows. Another pause. Longer this time. Okay. You have got this. Love you, Dad. Love you too, Peanut. The call ended. Marcus slipped the phone into his pocket and turned toward the conference room. Unaware that behind the partially open door, Charlotte Whitmore had heard every single word. When Marcus returned to the conference room, the atmosphere had changed. The easy confidence that filled the room earlier had begun to crack. A presentation was frozen on the large screen at the front. Several executives spoke over one another. Pages shuffled. Coffee cups sat forgotten. Something had gone wrong. Marcus slid quietly back into his seat and listened. A senior vice president stood beside the screen pointing toward a series of projected development timelines. These numbers do not align with the construction schedules, he said. Another executive immediately disagreed. The schedules are accurate. The forecasting model is the problem. The model came directly from your department. Because your team supplied incomplete data. The discussion grew sharper. Not hostile. Not loud. Just increasingly frustrated. Every solution seemed to create two new problems. Charlotte sat at the center of it all, listening carefully. Her posture remained perfect. Her expression remained calm. Yet something in her eyes had changed. The confidence that carried her through the morning was giving way to concern. A delay in one project could affect thousands of future housing units. Investors would ask questions. City officials would ask questions. Residents would ask questions. Nobody wanted to be responsible for the wrong answer. For several minutes the room moved in circles. Reports were reviewed. Spreadsheets were reopened. Charts expanded across the screen. Still no agreement emerged. Marcus watched quietly. He noticed something that everyone else seemed to miss. Every conversation focused on protecting a department. Protecting a budget. Protecting a timeline. Very little focused on the people the projects were supposed to serve. Across the room, Charlotte rubbed her temple briefly before straightening again. It was a small movement. Most people would never have noticed it. Marcus did. He had seen that gesture before. Parents made it when they were exhausted. Teachers made it before difficult meetings. People carried the same burdens regardless of how much money sat in their bank accounts. Finally, Charlotte spoke. Her voice cut through the room with practiced authority. Enough. Silence followed. Immediate. Complete. We are spending more time defending ourselves than solving the problem. Nobody argued. The room grew still. Charlotte looked around the table. Does anyone have a solution we have not already discussed? No one answered. A few people glanced at their notes. Others stared at the screen. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Then Marcus slowly raised his hand. Several heads turned. One executive looked surprised. Another looked skeptical. Charlotte's eyes settled on him. For a brief moment neither spoke. Marcus remembered the conversation with Emma only minutes earlier. Sometimes bravery simply meant speaking when your knees felt shaky. He stood. Not hurriedly. Not dramatically. Just calmly. I think everyone in this room is trying to solve a housing problem, he said. But we are treating it like a spreadsheet problem. The room remained silent. Marcus continued. Families do not live inside projections. They live inside apartments. They live inside neighborhoods. If the schedules are failing, maybe the question is not which department made a mistake. Maybe the question is whether the people affected were ever part of the conversation in the first place. Nobody interrupted him. Charlotte leaned back slightly in her chair. For the first time all morning, she was not looking at reports. She was looking directly at Marcus Reed. The silence that followed felt different from the earlier silence in the room. Before, it had been filled with tension. Now it carried curiosity. Marcus remained standing beside his chair. He did not rush to fill the space. Years of community meetings had taught him something important. People rarely listened while they were preparing to speak. They listened when they were given room to think. Charlotte watched him carefully. The same man she had barely acknowledged less than an hour earlier now held the attention of every executive at the table. Not because he was louder. Not because he held authority. Simply because he sounded like someone who had nothing to prove. One executive folded his arms. Are you suggesting we abandon the data? Marcus shook his head. Not at all. His voice remained calm. Data matters. But data tells you what is happening. People tell you why it is happening. Several heads turned toward him. Marcus glanced at the development map displayed on the screen. Entire sections of the city glowed in different colors. Numbers filled every corner. Cost estimates. Occupancy projections. Construction phases. I recognize those neighborhoods, he said. I have worked with families there for years. He pointed toward one district highlighted in blue. Last winter, a mother told me she spent 2 hours every morning getting her kids to school because transportation changed after redevelopment started. Nobody asked her if the new plan worked. They only asked if the project stayed on budget. The room remained still. Marcus continued. A project can succeed on paper and still fail the people it was meant to help. Charlotte felt something unexpected as she listened. Discomfort. Not because Marcus was wrong. Because part of her knew he was right. She looked back at the reports spread across the table. Thousands of pages. Years of planning. Countless meetings. Yet she could not remember the last time anyone had spoken about a specific family. A specific child. A specific morning. Everything had become percentages and projections. Somewhere along the way, the human side of the work had faded into the background. Marcus slipped one hand into his jacket pocket. Comfortable. Unhurried. When Emma was 7, he said, my daughter asked me a question. The mention of his daughter immediately caught Charlotte's attention. She remembered the phone call she had overheard. The same steady voice. The same quiet patience. Marcus smiled softly at the memory. She asked why adults always make things more complicated. A few people laughed quietly. Marcus did too. I told her I did not know. I'm still trying to figure that out. More smiles appeared around the room. The tension began to loosen. Not dramatically. Just enough. Marcus nodded toward the screen again. Maybe the solution is simpler than we think. Before changing timelines, budgets, or forecasts, spend 1 week talking directly to the residents affected by every phase of the project. Ask what is working. Ask what is not. Then build the next plan around what you learn. The room grew quiet again. Not because people disagreed. Because they were considering it. Charlotte lowered her pen onto the table. For the first time all morning, she was not calculating risks or reviewing numbers. She was listening. Really listening. And as Marcus stood there speaking with the same calm confidence he had used with his daughter in the hallway, Charlotte found herself paying attention to every single word. For several seconds after Marcus finished speaking, nobody moved. The city shimmered beyond the glass walls. A ferry crossed the dark blue water of Lake Michigan in the distance. Somewhere below, horns echoed through downtown traffic. Inside the conference room, however, the world seemed strangely still. The presentation screen remained frozen. The reports remained open. Yet the conversation had completely changed. The vice president, who had spent most of the morning defending his department, slowly lowered his pen. Another executive leaned back in his chair and stared at the development map as if seeing it for the first time. Marcus sat down quietly. He did not look around for approval. He did not expect applause. In his experience, the best ideas rarely arrived with fanfare. They arrived with silence. Charlotte folded her hands together on the table. Her eyes remained fixed on the notes in front of her, but she was not reading them. She was thinking. More specifically, she was remembering. 3 years earlier, shortly after becoming chief executive officer, she had visited one of the company's redevelopment projects. Cameras followed her. Local officials welcomed her. Reporters asked questions. The visit lasted less than 2 hours. She remembered shaking hands, smiling for photographs, reviewing plans, then leaving. What she could not remember was speaking to a single resident who actually lived there. The realization landed softly but heavily. Across the room, a senior planner cleared his throat. Actually, he said carefully, there may be something to what Mr. Reed is saying. Several heads turned. The planner adjusted his glasses. We conduct surveys every year, but participation rates have been dropping. Another executive nodded slowly. And when people do respond, many of the concerns never make it into the final reports. A third voice joined in. Then another. One by one, the room began connecting pieces that had previously seemed unrelated. Delayed transportation routes, community complaints, school access concerns, small issues individually, significant when combined. Marcus listened quietly. He recognized the pattern immediately. People were no longer arguing. They were solving. Charlotte noticed it too. Earlier that morning every comment had sounded defensive. Now the tone felt different. More honest. More collaborative. She looked toward Marcus again. There was nothing remarkable about his appearance. No expensive suit. No prestigious title printed beside his name. Yet somehow he had shifted the direction of an entire meeting with a few simple observations. Not by impressing people. By reminding them why the work mattered. Charlotte picked up her pen. How long would it take to organize resident listening sessions in every active development zone? She asked. The room became active again. Not chaotic. Focused. Numbers were gathered. Calendars reviewed. Possibilities discussed. For the next 20 minutes, the conversation moved faster than it had all morning. Real ideas emerged. Practical solutions followed. At one point Charlotte glanced toward Marcus and noticed he was making notes of his own. Not for himself. For the project. For the people who would eventually live inside those buildings. Something about that detail stayed with her. Most people entered rooms like this hoping to gain influence. Marcus seemed interested only in helping. Charlotte slowly closed the financial report in front of her. Then, for perhaps the first time in years, she asked herself a question she rarely considered. How many valuable voices had she overlooked simply because they arrived wrapped in ordinary clothing and quiet confidence? The meeting finally adjourned just after noon. Chairs slid back. Laptops closed. Conversations resumed in small clusters around the room. Outside the windows, the sunlight had brightened, turning the lake into a sheet of silver beneath the autumn sky. People gathered their belongings and moved toward the exits, already thinking about their next appointments. Marcus carefully folded his notes and slipped them back into his jacket pocket. He checked the time on his phone. Emma's presentation would be ending soon. He smiled to himself, hoping her shaky knees had carried her through it. As he stood, several people approached him. Some thanked him for his perspective. Others asked brief questions about the neighborhoods he had mentioned. Marcus answered politely, never lingering long. He had never been comfortable being the center of attention. A few minutes later the room had nearly emptied. Only a handful of executives remained. Charlotte sat alone at the far end of the conference table reviewing a page of handwritten notes. The expensive reports remained stacked beside her, untouched. For some reason she kept rereading the same sentence she had written 20 minutes earlier. People tell you why it is happening. Simple words. Yet they had unsettled something she had not examined in years. Growing up, Charlotte had been taught to value excellence above everything else. Achievement. Efficiency. Results. She had spent most of her adult life moving from one goal to the next. Graduate school. Promotions. Leadership positions. Boardrooms. Investors. Deadlines. There was always another mountain to climb. Another problem to solve. Somewhere along the way, listening had become secondary to directing. Understanding had become secondary to managing. The realization made her uncomfortable. She was not accustomed to questioning herself. Across the room she noticed Marcus gathering his things. Before she could overthink it, she stood. Mr. Reed. Marcus turned. Yes? Do you have a minute? He glanced at the clock. Then smiled politely. A few. Charlotte walked toward him. 4. A brief moment she found herself strangely nervous. That feeling alone surprised her. Entire rooms full of investors did not make her nervous. Yet this conversation somehow did. I wanted to ask you something, she said. How did you learn to approach problems that way? Marcus considered the question. Which way? Looking past the numbers. He smiled softly. Life teaches you. Charlotte waited. Marcus leaned lightly against the edge of the table. When you spend enough years helping people, you realize most problems are not what they first appear to be. He looked toward the windows. Someone says they need housing. Sometimes what they really need is transportation. Someone says they need transportation. Sometimes what they really need is childcare. People rarely arrive carrying the actual problem. They arrive carrying the symptom. Charlotte absorbed every word. Marcus continued. You learn to listen long enough to find the real story. The room grew quiet again. Not awkward. Reflective. Charlotte studied him carefully. There was no arrogance in his voice. No attempt to impress her. He spoke the way someone speaks about the weather. Honest. Direct. Certain. And your daughter? She asked before she could stop herself. Marcus looked surprised. Then he smiled. A genuine smile that softened his entire face. Emma? Charlotte nodded. She sounds important. Marcus laughed quietly. She is the most important thing in my life. The answer came without hesitation. Without performance. Without calculation. And somehow that simple truth struck Charlotte harder than anything else she had heard all day. For a moment neither of them spoke. The conference room that had felt crowded and noisy all morning now seemed almost peaceful. Sunlight stretched across the polished table. Somewhere down the hallway an elevator chimed softly. Marcus checked his phone again. A new message had appeared from Emma. 3 words. I did it. He laughed quietly. Charlotte noticed immediately. Good news? She asked. Marcus held up the phone. Pride filled his eyes before he said a single word. She gave her presentation. Charlotte smiled politely. And? Marcus opened the message thread. Another text had arrived. Got an A. His smile widened. Not dramatically. Not the kind of smile people perform for photographs. It was smaller than that. Real. The smile of a father whose entire day had suddenly become brighter. Looks like she did pretty well. Charlotte found herself smiling too. I can see that. Marcus slipped the phone back into his pocket. She worked hard for it. There was something in the way he said those words that made Charlotte pause. Most parents she knew measured success by results. Grades. Awards. Achievements. Marcus sounded proud of the effort itself. The distinction lingered in her mind. How old is she? Charlotte asked. 9. That is a fun age. Marcus laughed softly. Depends on the day. Charlotte laughed with him. The sound surprised her. Genuine laughter had become rare lately. Most conversations in her world revolved around contracts, deadlines, and expectations. Even celebrations often felt scheduled, controlled, efficient. Across from her stood a man who seemed capable of finding joy in a 3-word text message. She envied that more than she wanted to admit. Marcus noticed her expression shift slightly. You okay? He asked. The question caught her off guard. People asked if projects were okay. If meetings were okay. If quarterly projections were okay. Very few people ever asked if she was okay. Charlotte looked toward the windows. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass. Millions of people. Thousands of buildings. Endless movement. Endless ambition. Yet despite all of it, she often returned to an empty penthouse overlooking the same skyline. Success had given her many things. Time was not one of them. Connection was another. I am fine, she said automatically. Then she stopped. For some reason the answer felt dishonest. Marcus waited. Not pushing. Not prying. Simply waiting. The same way he had listened during the meeting. Charlotte looked down at her notebook. Actually, I am tired. The admission escaped before she could reconsider it. Marcus nodded as though she had shared something completely normal. That happens. Charlotte gave a quiet laugh. I suppose it does. She stared at the notes scattered across the table. Sometimes I spend so much time trying to solve problems that I forget why I started solving them in the first place. Marcus understood immediately. He could hear it in her voice. The exhaustion was not physical. It was deeper than that. The kind that arrived when purpose became buried beneath responsibility. He glanced toward the development plans spread across the table. Maybe that is why today mattered. Charlotte looked up. What do you mean? Marcus shrugged lightly. Maybe everyone in this room needed a reminder that buildings are not the goal. He paused. People are. Charlotte lowered her eyes. The words landed somewhere she could not easily ignore. Because deep down she knew he was right. And for the first time in a very long time, she wondered whether she had been climbing ladders so quickly that she had forgotten to look at the people standing beside them. The conversation lingered for another minute before Marcus glanced once more at the time. School would be letting out soon. Chicago traffic had a way of turning a 20-minute drive into 45 if someone waited too long. He slipped his phone into his pocket and gathered the last of his papers. I should probably get moving, he said. Charlotte nodded, though part of her wished the conversation would continue. Not because she needed advice. At least that was what she would have claimed an hour earlier. The truth was simpler. She had spent most of her day around people eager to impress her. Marcus was one of the few people who seemed completely uninterested in doing that. There was something refreshing about it. Picking up Emma? She asked. Always. His answer arrived instantly. Charlotte smiled. No after-school program? Marcus shook his head. Sometimes. But I try not to miss pickup if I can help it. He folded the final page and slid it into his jacket. Those drives home matter. Charlotte tilted her head slightly. Because you get to hear about her day? Exactly. He smiled again. You learn a lot during a 15-minute drive. The image settled unexpectedly into Charlotte's mind. A father and daughter talking about school projects, friends, worries, and victories. While driving through city streets. Such an ordinary thing. Yet she could not remember the last time anyone had described an ordinary moment with that much appreciation. Marcus adjusted the strap of his worn messenger bag. You should try it sometime. Charlotte laughed softly. I do not have children. Does not have to be children. He shrugged. Could be a friend. Family. Anybody who matters. His eyes drifted toward the window. Most people just want someone willing to listen. The words landed with surprising weight. Charlotte thought about her own schedule. Breakfast meetings. Investor calls. Strategy sessions. Networking dinners. Hundreds of conversations every month. Yet very few of them involved genuine listening. Most were transactions disguised as discussions. Before she realized it, she asked, How do you make time for all of it? Marcus looked genuinely puzzled. For what? Work. Community meetings. Parenting. He considered the question. I do not always make time. He smiled. Sometimes I just choose what matters most. Charlotte looked away briefly. The answer sounded simple. Yet she knew how difficult it actually was. For years she had convinced herself that success required constant sacrifice. Longer hours. More commitments. More responsibility. She had become so efficient at carrying everything that she rarely stopped to ask whether she should. Marcus stepped toward the doorway. The conversation seemed finished. Then Charlotte remembered something. A small moment from that morning. A moment she suddenly wished she could undo. Her eyes dropped briefly toward her own hand. The memory returned with uncomfortable clarity. His outstretched hand. Her nod. The silent dismissal she had barely noticed at the time. Marcus had never mentioned it. Never reacted. Never allowed it to shape the rest of the day. Somehow that made it worse. Charlotte took a breath. Then another. Before she could second-guess herself, she walked around the table and stopped a few feet in front of him. Marcus looked up. Curious. Waiting. The afternoon sunlight poured through the windows behind them, casting long shadows across the polished floor. For a brief moment neither spoke. Then Charlotte slowly raised her hand. Marcus looked at her hand for a brief second. Then he looked at her face. The room was quiet except for the distant hum of air conditioning and the faint sounds of elevators moving through the building. Charlotte held his gaze. There was no executive confidence in her expression now. No carefully managed authority. Just honesty. The kind that rarely appeared in boardrooms. I think we got off to a poor start this morning, she said. Marcus understood immediately. A small smile touched the corner of his mouth. Charlotte continued before courage could leave her. I should have treated you with more respect when we met. The words felt unfamiliar. Not because she did not believe them. Because she was not used to saying them out loud. Marcus studied her for a moment. Then he reached out and accepted her hand. The handshake lasted only a second. Simple. Ordinary. Yet somehow it carried more meaning than many of the contracts Charlotte had signed throughout her career. Thank you, she said quietly. Marcus nodded. We all have days we would do differently. The answer surprised her. There was no resentment in it. No attempt to make her feel guilty. Just grace. The kind of grace people rarely receive once they make a mistake. Charlotte found herself smiling. A real smile this time. The kind that reached her eyes. You know, she said, you have given me a lot to think about today. Marcus laughed softly. Hopefully not enough to ruin your afternoon. Quite the opposite. She glanced toward the development plans still scattered across the table. I think you may have improved it. For a moment they stood together looking out at the skyline. The city stretched endlessly beneath the afternoon sun. Thousands of stories unfolding simultaneously. Families heading home. Children leaving school. Workers finishing shifts. People living lives that would never appear on quarterly reports. Charlotte suddenly understood why Marcus spoke about them the way he did. They were not statistics. They were the reason any of the work mattered. Marcus checked the time once more and slipped his phone into his pocket. I really need to go. Emma is waiting. Exactly? Charlotte nodded. Then do not let me keep you. Marcus turned toward the door. Halfway there, he looked back. For what it is worth, I think your team can make a real difference. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. Even after today? Especially after today. Then he was gone. The door closed softly behind him. Charlotte remained where she was. The conference room suddenly felt larger than before. Quieter. She walked back to the table and looked at the notes covering its surface. Financial projections. Construction schedules. Cost analyses. Then she found the sentence she had written earlier. People tell you why it is happening. She stared at the words for a long moment. Down on the street far below, Marcus crossed the intersection carrying his worn messenger bag. No audience. No recognition. No expectation of reward. Just a father hurrying to pick up his daughter. Charlotte watched until he disappeared into the crowd. 10 minutes. That was all it had taken. 10 minutes to move from assumptions to understanding. 10 minutes to realize she had almost overlooked one of the most valuable voices in the room. She closed her notebook and headed for the door. Tomorrow there would be more meetings. More deadlines. More decisions. But something had changed. Not because someone had argued with her. Not because someone had impressed her. Because a man with quiet dignity had reminded her that respect is not earned by status. It is revealed by character. And as Charlotte stepped into the hallway, she found herself hoping that the next time she met someone new, she would remember the lesson before the handshake instead of after it.